Ow! Fuck this. Of course. Yeah. Get in there. You stepped on my glue trap, didn't you? Yeah. Well, now what are we gonna do, buddy? Sometimes the Empire of Dirt provides. Alright, so I think my goal for this frame jig is I want to build it as inexpensively as possible while also still maintaining a pretty good quality. Again, like everything I do, trying to stay on a budget here. So most of the frame jig is going to be made out of recycled scrap metal, costing me next to nothing. First thing I'm going to do though is I'm going to get this front end pulled off the bike just to make things a little bit easier to move around and manhandle. Okay, got that little bit of housekeeping done. That was driving me nuts. Looks way better. So, have the frame on the table, neck jig just kind of roughed in place. I have an idea in my head of what this is going to look like, but I haven't like drawn anything out on paper just yet. What I'm doing right now is trying to figure out just how long I want my lower two rails to be. And I'm kind of thinking about 6 foot ought to do it. Awkward one-handed tape measure action. So if I'm going off of there, right there is 5 foot, which brings me just to the end of my axle plates. But if I went an extra foot just so I have the room, that way will give me a little extra breathing room. So yeah, I think 6 feet ought to work. Sure, let's go with that. Okay, back here in the backyard, I've got my collection of scrap metal and poison ivy, and I managed to drag out this chunk of C-channel that's like 20 foot long. It's 1 5/8 inch by 4 inch, and that's going to be plenty for what I need. I'm going to cut down probably 2 8 foot long sections, and those are going to be the bottom rails for my frame jig. Just drag this over here to the shop. That's heavy. Oh, fuck this. 8.5. 8.5. 8.5. 8.5. All right. That's as good as it's going to get. Let's get this thing locked down. Make sure we're still square. Nothing moved around when we tighten those up. Still 8.5. Still 8.5. Groovy. We're locked down. Hell yeah. Alright, and we'll get this vertical post for the neck leveled out. Pretty level there. That one could use a little bit of work. Kind of bump it. Loosen up the nuts a little bit, give me a little wiggle room. And we'll bump it. That's got us more level. All right, cool. That worked out. Tighten my nuts back down. Giggity. Level that way. Level that way. Sweet. All right. All right. Not 100% done yet, but pretty darn close. I've got a frame jig made from scrap. Mostly from scrap. So we'll start with the basic here. This is my welding table. This is a fab block from weldtables.com. This one is 2 feet by 4 feet by I think 6 inches deep. Has these 5/8 inch holes, 2 inches on centers. They are tab and slot fabrication, which is pretty cool. Have you ever seen these things from the bottom side? They have all these ribbing and everything. So this thing is beef. I love this table. This table's freaking awesome. Also, when I got it from them, I got this square, and I'm using it right now for an extension for where these rails kind of hang out past the end of the table, just for a little extra support. The legs I made out of 2-inch square, and I put these threaded adjusters on them so that I can adjust the table for level, you know, this way, this way, all the ways. Bottom rails, these are just under 2-inch by 4-inch by about 1/8 inch or maybe 3/16 inch thick. Just some C-channel that I had in my scrap metal pile in the backyard. Absolutely free. This vertical post is 2-inch by 2-inch, 1/8 inch wall tubing that I saw in the scrap metal pile at work. I asked my boss man, hey, how much do you want for the stick metal? He said, take it. So I took it. The neck jig came from Chop Source. Probably spent about 120 bucks on this. The centering cones do not come with this. The centering cones my buddy Mike turned out for me on his lathe. In exchange, I'm going to powder coat some parts for him. So trading work, lowering the cost, free. All right, moving on. The rest of these tubes are just scrap leftovers that I had from other projects, like the vertical post here for the axle block is the same 2-inch tubing that I had left over when I made the legs for the table. And I'll just go over how all this works together. So these tables are supposed to be like within a few thousandths of being flat in either way according to their website. So this is the longest, flattest thing that I own. So I figured that would make a pretty good base for a frame jig. So the idea is that the C-channels here, they are going to mount down to the table via these blocks here. And they just go down through there, there. The idea that way is if these C-channels should have any wave, these plates will pull it down to the table flat. Now the next step of how this works is my two vertical posts here for the neck and my vertical post back here for the axle are both 2-inch wide. So I cut 2-inch wide spacers. I've got one here, got one there, one there, one there, and of course this one. And I drilled holes and ran bolts in between each spacer. And the idea is that should these bottom rails have any kind of bow to them, tightening up these bolts against those spacers should pull that bow flat and straight against each other. So the next pieces that I have are these pieces of 1.5-inch tubing here, here, and here. All those are for is just a spacer to space the frame rail off of the C-channel. The reason for that being these cross members here, here, and also the kickstand bracket over here were hitting the C-channel and stopping the frame from sitting flat and level. So all those are just spacers. Also, I have these two tubes here. Same idea. They're just going to go drop down through these holes. And those two are going to hold the bottom rails of the frame down to the jig, down to the table, keeping the bottom rails of the frame flat and square and level. And that leads up to basically what I got left is trying to figure out how I'm going to make this axle block. So I have this piece of tubing right here. The stock 3/4-inch axle has a nice snug fit right through there. Again, that's just a piece of scrap metal that a buddy snagged onto from his work, and he dropped off and said, hey, you might use this someday. So today is someday. I just need to figure out what's the best way to join the spacer tube to my vertical tube. The easiest way I can think of right now is just after I get everything else leveled and squared would be just to weld it across there and be done with it. And right now I'm just working on getting the bike centered left to right, and what I'm trying to do is get an equal distance, you know, from this vertical post to the inside of each axle plate, and kind of having a hard time getting a good measurement off of it here. So what I think I'm going to do is measure the center of my axle spacer, scribe a line, measure the center of my tube, scribe a line, and that way I can line the two centers up. That should have the rear end of the bike square, and then I'll go ahead and just weld this thing up. Sure. Oh, that's right. Right. All right, so I got a line scribed on the center of my vertical post there, and scribed a line on the center of this axle spacer. It is just a little snug fit, but that's all right. I'd rather be just a little snug than a little loose, I think. That's better. Thank you. That's more like what I wanted. Okay, we'll see if my center line gets a little bit off. So we'll slide her, come on baby. Come on. Over, that's pretty good. I think that's pretty lined up. I'm going to do some double checking, try to measure anywhere that I can, make sure that we're square left to right, and I think we're just about ready to wrap this thing up. We are pretty level, you know, that away. We're pretty level that away too, so all right, looking good. Level there. Level there. All right, I'm gonna throw a clamp on here and get this dude welded up. it fixes everything. I think that means my jig is done. All right, the scrap metal frame jig is finally done. That's not going anywhere. All right, cool. Finally ready to wrap this thing up. Oh yeah, and I painted my Nightster finally. It's just a little dirty, but it's alright. So yeah, I'm thinking next weekend we're gonna come in here and we're gonna go slicey, and then we're gonna go bzzz. Should be fun. Alright, frame jig, finally done. Awesome. I think we're gonna wrap this one up right here, and as always, everybody, thanks for sticking around, thanks for watching. Catch you on the next one. Oh, and it came with a sticker. Good job, Chop Source. Thank you. I'm gonna find somewhere cool to put that.